The first thing my father did was lift his wine glass, look straight at me across a table of 30 people and say, "You were always the mistake." No one dropped their fork. No one told him to stop. A few people shifted in their seats. Eyes lowering into their plates like this was just another uncomfortable moment to survive. The chandelier above us reflected in the polished mahogany table, and for a second I could see myself in it, small, distorted, exactly the way he'd always described me. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old. And 2 weeks ago, in that dining room in Westport, Connecticut, my father said something he'd been repeating in different ways my entire life. The mistake child. The accident. The one who wasn't supposed to be here. He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Like it was a fact everyone already knew. My brother Ethan sat to his right, perfectly composed, adjusting his cufflinks. The golden child who never had to question where he belonged. My mother stared at her glass of water, fingers tight around it, silent the way she'd always been. And me? I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because by that point I had learned exactly how to survive moments like that. You don't react. You don't argue. You let it pass like background noise. That's what I had done at 7, the first time I heard it. That's what I had done at 16, when he said it in front of my teachers. That's what I had done at 22, when he refused to help with my tuition because, in his words, I'm not investing in a mistake. But that night felt different. Maybe it was the way he said it louder than usual. Maybe it was the way a few relatives actually looked at me like they were seeing something they hadn't noticed before. Or maybe it was because for the first time I didn't feel like shrinking. I felt still. Like something inside me had finally stopped trying to fix him. Dinner continued like nothing had happened. Plates were cleared. Dessert was served. Conversations picked back up about vacation homes and stock portfolios. And I played my part. I laughed when I was expected to. I nodded at the right moments. I even thanked my parents for hosting. But what they didn't know was that everything had already shifted. Because 2 weeks after that dinner, a sealed envelope would land in my hands. And inside it was something that wouldn't just prove him wrong. It would change who I was entirely. But I didn't know that yet. That night I drove home alone, the Connecticut streets quiet, lined with identical white houses and perfectly trimmed lawns. My phone buzzed once, Noah, my fiancé. I let it go to voicemail. I needed the silence. When I got to my apartment, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Features my father had spent years pointing out like evidence in a case he'd already decided. Too different, he used to say. Doesn't look like a Carter. I used to think if I worked harder, achieved more, became something undeniable, it would erase that label. But sitting there that night, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. This was never about proof. Not for him. And maybe not for me anymore either. But I didn't realize then how far that truth would go. Or that the story I had built my entire identity around was already beginning to crack in ways I couldn't yet see. And what happened next was something no one at that table was prepared for. I did not sleep that night. Not even for a minute. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his voice over and over again, the exact tone, the exact pause before he said the word mistake like it was a label he had been saving for the right audience. 30 people. That part mattered. It always mattered when it was public. Private comments you can ignore. Public ones stick. By morning my phone had 3 missed calls from Noah and a text that read, "Are you okay?" I typed out a response twice and deleted it both times before finally sending something simple. "I am fine. Just tired." That was easier than explaining something I had never fully explained to anyone. At 9:30, I was sitting at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold when my phone rang again. This time it was my father. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. His voice came through steady, controlled, like nothing had happened the night before. "Emily, we need to talk." I did not say anything. He continued anyway. "Your mother and I have been discussing the wedding. There are certain things that need to be addressed before we move forward." The word address felt deliberate, like he had rehearsed it. I set the mug down slowly. "What things?" A pause. "Then I think it is time we settle this once and for all." I already knew what he meant. "I think you should take a DNA test," he said, his tone calm, almost reasonable, as if he was suggesting a routine medical checkup. There was no anger in his voice, no hesitation, just certainty. It was the same certainty he had carried for years. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the parking lot below. Cars coming and going like nothing in the world had shifted. "You are serious," I said. "Completely." He exhaled softly. "Emily, this is not personal. It is about clarity. About truth." I almost laughed at that. Truth. After everything. He kept going. "If the results confirm what they should, I will attend your wedding. I will walk you down the aisle. I will put all of this behind us." Another pause. "But if they do not, then we both know where we stand." There it was. Not a request. An ultimatum. The same pattern, just dressed up differently. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn something from him that should have been unconditional. Approval. Recognition. A simple acknowledgement that I belonged. And now he was offering it like a transaction. Proof in exchange for presents. I should have been angry. I should have told him no. But instead I heard myself say, "Okay." He did not sound surprised. "Good. I will have my attorney send over the details. We can arrange the test this week." My attorney. Of course. Because to him this was not family. This was a case to be closed. After we hung up, I sat there in silence, my phone still in my hand, my reflection faint in the black screen. I expected to feel something stronger. Anger. Hurt. Anything. But what I felt instead was something quieter. Something colder. Like a door had finally closed somewhere deep inside me. Around noon, Noah showed up at my apartment unannounced. He knocked twice, then let himself in with the spare key I had given him months ago. He took one look at me and knew. What did he say? I told him. Every word. The DNA test. The condition for attending the wedding. The calm, almost clinical way my father had framed it. Noah listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening slightly with each sentence. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Maybe you should do it. Not for him. For you." I looked at him, searching for something in his expression. And what if it proves him right? Noah shook his head slowly. "Then at least you will know the truth." I looked away, back toward the window, toward the same parking lot, the same ordinary view. The truth. That word again. Sounded simple. Clean. But something about it felt incomplete. Like there was a layer I could not quite see yet. That afternoon, I received an email from a private lab. Discreet. Certified. Results guaranteed within 72 hours. My father had already arranged everything. All I had to do was show up. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing my laptop, because something about how easy it all seemed did not sit right with me. And for the first time in years, I started to wonder if the question we had been asking all along was even the right one. The lab was in a quiet office park 20 minutes from my apartment, the kind of place you would never notice unless you were looking for it. A low glass building with a small sign near the entrance that simply read Precision Diagnostics, no logo, no advertising, just a name that sounded clinical and distant, exactly the way my father would prefer it. I sat in my car for a moment before going in, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people walk in and out of nearby offices like this. Was just another ordinary weekday, but nothing about this felt ordinary to me. Inside, everything was spotless, white walls, soft lighting, a receptionist who spoke in a calm, practiced tone. She checked my name, handed me a clipboard, and asked me to verify my information, Emily Carter, 28, address in Westport, Connecticut. I signed where they told me to sign, initialed where they pointed, each line feeling less like paperwork and more like a quiet agreement to something I could not undo. The technician who called my name was polite, professional, the kind of person who had done this hundreds of times before. She explained the process in simple terms: cheek swab, sealed sample, results within 72 hours, nothing complicated, nothing dramatic, just science. I nodded as if I understood everything, as if this was just another task on a list, but my mind kept drifting somewhere else, back to a memory I had not thought about in years. I was 7, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, my father reading the newspaper, my mother standing by the sink, and I remember asking a simple question: why do I not look like you? It was not meant to challenge anything, it was curiosity, the kind children have before they learn which questions are dangerous. My father had folded the newspaper slowly, looked at me for a second too long, and then said, "Because you were a mistake." I did not understand what that meant at the time, not fully, but I understood the tone, the finality of it, the way my mother had gone quiet, the way no one corrected him, and from that moment on the word stayed, not always spoken out loud but always there, in the way decisions were made, in the way I was treated, in the space I occupied in that house. The technician's voice pulled me back. She asked me to open my mouth slightly, swabbed the inside of my cheek with a small sterile stick, quick, efficient, almost forgettable. She placed the sample into a sealed container, labeled it, and then it was done. That was it. Years of doubt, years of quiet questions, reduced to something that fit in the palm of her hand. As I walked back through the lobby, I noticed a mirror on the wall near the exit. I stopped without thinking, looking at my reflection again. The same features I had studied my entire life, the same ones my father had pointed to as proof of something being wrong, too different, too unlike him. I used to search for similarities, something I could hold on to, a shared expression, a familiar angle. Anything, but now, standing there, I realized I was not looking for that anymore. I was looking for something else, something I could not quite name yet. Outside, the air felt colder than it had that morning. I checked my phone, one new message from my father, simply confirming that the test had been completed. No concern, no question, just acknowledgement, like a box had been checked. I did not respond. Instead, I drove home in silence, the road stretching out in front of me, every mile feeling like it was leading towards something inevitable, something already set in motion. When I got back to my apartment, there was a small envelope waiting at my door. No return address, no markings except my name written in neat, careful handwriting. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. Something about it felt out of place, like it did not belong to the sequence of events that had been unfolding. I picked it up slowly, the paper slightly thicker than normal, heavier than it should have been for its size, and as I turned it over in my hands, I felt a strange sense of familiarity, like I had seen handwriting like this before a long time ago, in a place I had almost forgotten. I did not open it right away, not yet, because something in me knew that whatever was inside that envelope was not just going to answer a question, it was going to change the question entirely, and I was not sure I was ready for that. Not yet, but I also knew I would not be able to ignore it for long because, for the first time in my life, it felt like the truth was not just something I was chasing. It was something that had already started to find me. I stood in my apartment for almost 5 minutes just holding that envelope, turning it over in my hands like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. The paper was thick, the edges clean, and the handwriting on the front was precise, almost old-fashioned, not rushed, not careless. Someone had taken their time writing my name, Emily Carter, like it mattered, and that was what unsettled me the most, because nothing in my life with my family had ever felt like it was handled with that kind of care. I finally closed the door behind me, set my keys on the counter, and walked slowly to the kitchen table, the same place I had been sitting that morning, except now everything felt different, quieter, heavier, like the air itself was waiting. I sat down and placed the envelope in front of me, my fingers resting on it but not opening it yet, because a part of me already knew this was not random, this was not junk mail, this was not a mistake. This was intentional, and the timing of it, the same day as the test, was too precise to ignore. I took a breath, slid my finger under the seal, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and something else, something smaller, heavier. I set the second item aside for a moment and unfolded the paper first. The handwriting inside matched the outside, neat, deliberate, and the moment my eyes landed on the first line, my chest tightened. Emily, if you are reading this, then it means things have started to unfold exactly the way I feared they would. I stopped reading just for a second, my mind catching on that one word, unfold, like whatever was happening right now had been expected by someone long before me. I continued, your father has always believed he knew the truth, but men like him do not look for truth, they look for confirmation. And when they do not find it, they create it. I felt a chill run through me, not because the words were shocking, but because they were accurate in a way I had never been able to articulate myself. The letter went on, I wanted to tell you this in person, but I was not sure I would have the chance, so I left this for you just in case. There are things about your birth, about that hospital, that were never explained properly, things I tried to question but was told to leave alone. I remember the day you were brought home, I remember the silence, I remember your mother's face, and I remember your father refusing to hold you for the first 2 days. My hands started to tremble slightly, the words blurring for a moment before I forced myself to focus again. Keep your records safe, all of them. Do not rely on what you are told, rely on what you can prove, and most importantly, do not assume the question you are being asked is the real one. I stared at that sentence longer than the others, because it echoed something I had felt earlier that day but could not explain, that something about all of this was misaligned, like we were solving the wrong problem entirely. At the bottom of the letter, there was no dramatic ending, no long goodbye, just a simple signature. Eleanor, my grandmother, the one person in my family who had ever looked at me without that quiet doubt in her eyes, the one person who had told me once when I was 12 that I saw things others missed. I folded the letter slowly, placing it back on the table, and then I looked at the second item in the envelope. It was a small key, brass, slightly worn, attached to a thin piece of paper with a handwritten note, Safety Deposit Box, Northwest Trust, Portland, Oregon. My breath caught for a second. Portland. I had not been there since I was a child, not since one specific trip I barely remembered but suddenly felt important in a way it never had before. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the key, the letter, the pieces of something that was clearly much bigger than a simple DNA test. Because this was no longer about whether I was my father's daughter, it was about something deeper, something older, something that had been hidden long before I even knew there was something to question. And as I sat there, one thought kept repeating in my mind, quiet but persistent: what if he was wrong about more than just me? And what if the truth he was so certain about was not even his to claim in the first place? That night I did not turn on the television, I did not open my laptop, I did not call Noah back. I just sat at my kitchen table with the letter and the key in front of me, reading the same lines over and over again like they might rearrange themselves into something simpler, something easier to understand, but they did not. If anything, the more I read them, the more they unsettled me, because this was not vague. This was not emotional speculation, this was specific, calculated. My grandmother had known something she believed was important enough to hide, important enough to protect, and most importantly, important enough to wait until now. I checked the time, it was just past 7 in the evening, which meant the lab would not call until at least tomorrow, maybe the day after. 72 hours, that was what they promised, but suddenly that result felt smaller, like it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. I picked up the key again, turning it between my fingers, the metal cool and solid, real in a way everything else felt abstract. Portland, Oregon, a safety deposit box, something stored away years ago, waiting. I tried to remember the last time I had heard that city connected to my family, and then it came back slowly like a memory rising from deep water. I was 5, maybe 6, we had taken a trip there. I remembered the rain, the gray sky, the smell of wet pavement. I remembered a hospital, not clearly, just flashes, white walls, a hallway, my mother holding my hand too tightly, my father speaking in a low voice to someone at a desk, and my grandmother standing a few feet away watching everything, her expression sharp, focused, like she was noticing something no one else wanted to see. I had never thought about that trip again until now, because no one ever mentioned it. It was like it had been erased, tucked away the same way this key had been. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark parking lot below, my reflection faint in the glass, and for the first time I asked a different question. Not am I his daughter, but what actually happened that day? Because if my grandmother was right, then whatever truth my father believed in was built on something incomplete, something altered, something he either misunderstood or chose not to question. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the silence. I turned, expecting Noah again, but it was my mother, which was unusual. She rarely called me directly, and when she did, it was usually brief, practical. I hesitated for a second before answering. Her voice was softer than usual, almost careful. Emily, I heard you went to the lab today. I did not ask how she knew. I already knew the answer. Your father told you? Yes. A pause. Then you did not have to agree so quickly. I leaned against the counter, holding the phone a little tighter. It did not feel like a choice. Another pause, longer this time. Emily, she said quietly, there are things that are better left alone. I closed my eyes for a second, hearing the same pattern, the same avoidance I had grown up with, things left unsaid, questions redirected, truth softened into silence. I opened my eyes again, looking at the key still resting on the table. I think that is exactly the problem, I said. Too many things have been left alone. She did not respond right away, and when she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Your grandmother always believed that. I swallowed, feeling something shift again, subtle but undeniable. Why did she send me this? I asked, glancing at the envelope, at the letter, at the key that now felt heavier than before. My mother exhaled slowly, like she had been holding something in for a long time, because she did not trust that the truth would survive otherwise. The words hung in the air between us, simple but loaded with meaning, and for the first time I realized this was not just about doubt or suspicion. This was about something that had been actively hidden, protected, maybe even buried. After we hung up, I stood there for a long time, the apartment quiet again, the city outside continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had, because now I had two paths in front of me: wait for the DNA results and accept whatever they told me, or follow the one thing in my life that had never lied to me, my instinct. And that instinct was telling me that whatever was in that safety deposit box was not just connected to my past, it was connected to something that could rewrite it entirely, and I did not realize then just how much that choice would cost me, or how quickly everything I thought I knew would begin to unravel. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, the kind of wake up where your body is already alert before your mind has caught up. And for a few seconds I just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to remember why everything felt different, and then I saw it, the envelope still sitting on the kitchen table from the night before, the key beside it. And it all came rushing back at once. I got up slowly, walked over and picked up my phone, the screen lighting up with a new notification, Precision Diagnostics. My chest tightened for a second, but when I opened it, it was not the results, just a confirmation: your sample is being processed. Estimated completion 48 to 72 hours. I exhaled quietly. I did not know if I felt relieved or disappointed, maybe both, because now I had time to think, time to decide, and that was almost worse. I poured myself coffee, this time actually drinking it, standing by the counter, staring at the key again. Portland, Oregon. It was not a small decision. It was over 3,000 miles away, a 5-hour flight, a disruption to everything that was already in motion. But the more I stood there, the clearer it became that waiting was not really an option anymore. Not after the letter, not after what my mother had said, not after everything that had been left unanswered for so long. By 9:15 I had already opened my laptop, searching flights, comparing times, looking for the earliest departure. By 10 o'clock I had booked a one-way ticket leaving that afternoon. I did not tell my father, I did not tell my mother, and when Noah called again, I let it ring before finally answering. His voice came through immediately, concerned, steady. Emily. I was about to come over again. Where are you? I glanced at my suitcase, half packed on the bed, clothes folded quickly, not carefully. I am going to Portland, I said. There was a pause on the line, longer than usual. Portland? Why? I picked up the key, holding it between my fingers as if he could somehow see it through the phone. Because I think the answer is there. Another pause. Then, do you want me to come with you? I closed my eyes for a second, considering it, wanting to say yes, wanting someone there who understood me, who saw me. But something about this felt personal, something I needed to face on my own. Not this time, I said quietly. I will call you when I land. He did not argue, which was one of the things I loved about him. He trusted me even when he did not fully understand. Just be careful, okay? I nodded even though he could not see me. I will. After I hung up, I finished packing, grabbed the envelope, the letter, the key, and placed them carefully into my bag, making sure they were not buried, not lost among everything else. This was the reason I was going. The rest did not matter. The drive to the airport felt surreal, like I was moving through a version of my life that had not quite caught up with itself yet. Traffic was light, the sky overcast, the kind of gray that made everything look muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. At the airport, everything was routine: security lines, boarding passes, people rushing past with carry-ons and coffee cups, completely unaware that for me, this was not just a trip, this was a turning point. I found my seat by the gate, sat down, and checked my phone again. Still no results, still nothing from the lab, just silence. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, and for the first time since all of this started, I allowed myself to feel something close to fear, not of what I would find, but of how much it might change, because whatever was waiting in that safety deposit box had been hidden for a reason, protected for years, maybe decades, and I had no idea if I was ready for what it might reveal. Boarding was called, and I stood up, grabbing my bag, stepping into the line with everyone else, just another passenger on a flight to Portland. But as I walked down the jet bridge, one thought stayed with me, steady, unavoidable. This was not about proving my father wrong anymore. It was about discovering how deep his mistake actually went. And I had a feeling that whatever I was about to uncover was going to reach far beyond anything I had imagined. The moment the plane landed in Portland, I felt it again, that strange sense of familiarity, like stepping into a place my body remembered even if my mind did not. The air was cooler, damp in a way that clung to everything. And as I walked through the terminal, I caught flashes of something just out of reach, like a memory trying to surface but not quite breaking through. I kept moving, following the signs, picking up my bag, stepping outside into the gray afternoon where the sky hung low and heavy over the city. I did not waste time. I got into the first rideshare I saw and gave the driver the address from the small note attached to the key, Northwest Trust. He nodded without question and pulled away from the curb. The city passed by in a blur of glass buildings, old brick storefronts, and tree-lined streets that felt quieter than anything back home. Less polished, more real. I watched everything carefully, as if something in the landscape might trigger the missing pieces in my memory. But nothing came, not yet. 20 minutes later, the car slowed in front of a tall, understated building, nothing flashy, just a clean stone facade and a discreet sign near the entrance, Northwest Trust. I stepped out, the cool air hitting my face, grounding me for a second before I walked inside. The lobby was quiet, almost too quiet, soft lighting, polished floors, and a receptionist seated behind a large desk who looked up the moment I entered. Her expression professional but curious. Can I help you? I nodded, reaching into my bag and pulling out the key. My name is Emily Carter. I believe I have a safety deposit box here. She glanced at the key, then at her computer, typing quickly. her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. After a few seconds, she looked back up at me, her expression shifting slightly, almost like recognition. "One moment please," she said, standing up and disappearing through a door behind the desk. I stood there alone, the silence stretching longer than it should have, my heartbeat picking up just enough for me to notice. Something about this felt expected, not by me, but by someone else, like I had just stepped into a sequence that had already been set in motion. The receptionist returned with a man in a dark suit, older, composed, his presence carrying a kind of quiet authority. "Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I am Daniel Harper, senior manager here." I shook his hand, his grip firm but not overwhelming. "We have been expecting you," he added calmly. I blinked, caught off guard. "Expecting me?" He nodded slightly. "Your grandmother made arrangements years ago. Instructions that were to be followed under very specific conditions." My chest tightened. "What conditions?" He gestured for me to follow him. We walked down a long hallway, the sound of our footsteps echoing softly against the walls. "She instructed us that this box was not to be accessed until you came in person, and only after certain events had taken place." I swallowed, my mind already racing ahead. "What events?" He stopped in front of a secured door, turning to look at me directly. "A paternity test initiated by your father." The words landed heavier than I expected, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed something deeper. This had been anticipated, planned for, long before I ever stepped into that lab. He entered a code, the door unlocking with a soft click, and led me inside. Rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls, each one identical, each one holding something hidden, something important to someone. He stopped at one near the back, inserted a master key, then handed me mine. "This box has not been opened since it was placed here," he said quietly. "The contents are exactly as your grandmother left them." I stared at the small metal door in front of me, my hand tightening slightly around the key. Everything up to this point had been leading here, every question, every doubt, every piece of uncertainty, all narrowing down to whatever was inside this box. I inserted the key slowly, turning it until I felt the lock give way, and for a brief moment I hesitated, because once I opened it, there would be no going back, no pretending things were simple, no returning to the version of my life where this was just about a test result. I took a breath, steadying myself, and pulled the box open, not knowing that what I was about to see would not just answer my questions, it would completely redefine them. Inside the box, there was no single document waiting neatly on top, no obvious answer ready to reveal itself. Instead, there were layers, a stack of carefully organized folders, each one labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. The same precise, deliberate style I had seen in the letter. I reached in slowly and lifted the top folder, my hand steady but my chest tightening with every second. The label read Hospital Records, Portland General, 1998. The year I was born. I opened it carefully, flipping through the first few pages. Medical forms, intake sheets, signatures, dates. Everything looked normal at first glance, the kind of paperwork you would expect, but then I noticed something that made me stop. 2 names listed under newborn records for the same date, same time window. One of them was mine, Emily Carter. The other, a name I did not recognize, Olivia Hayes. I frowned slightly, scanning the lines again. Both entries marked within minutes of each other, both assigned to the same maternity wing. I turned the page, my fingers moving faster now, searching. There were notes, annotations, something about a temporary reassignment of rooms due to capacity, a mention of overlapping staff shifts. Nothing alarming on its own, but together it felt off, like pieces that did not quite fit. I swallowed, setting that folder aside and reaching for the next one, labeled Correspondence. This one was thicker, filled with printed emails, letters, formal inquiries, all from my grandmother, addressed to the hospital, to administrators, even to a legal office. The dates spanned over several months after my birth. Question after question, requests for clarification, inconsistencies she had noticed, details that did not align, and every response she received was polite, controlled but vague, repeating the same assurances that everything had been handled according to protocol, that there was no cause for concern. I felt my pulse quicken as I read, because this was not a single moment of doubt. This was persistence. My grandmother had not let this go. She had followed it, pushed it, documented everything, and then, at the bottom of one stack, there was a final letter, shorter than the others, from a legal representative, advising her to cease further inquiry due to lack of actionable evidence. I stared at that line for a long second. Something about it felt less like closure and more like a warning. I set the folder down, my mind already racing ahead, and reached for the third one, labeled Photos. Inside were several printed images, older, slightly faded. I picked up the first one. It showed a hospital room, my mother lying in bed, pale but smiling faintly, my father standing beside her. his expression unreadable, and in his arms, a newborn wrapped in a standard hospital blanket. I leaned closer, studying the image carefully. Something about it felt strange, not obvious but enough to make me look twice. I flipped to the next photo, another angle, same room, same people, but this time the baby's face was partially visible. I froze, my breath catching slightly. The features did not match what I had seen in the mirror my entire life. The hair was darker, the shape of the face different, subtle differences, but enough that I could not ignore them. I checked the back of the photo, a handwritten note, Day 1. I placed it down slowly, my hands no longer as steady as before, because this was no longer abstract, this was physical, visual, something I could not explain away with assumptions. I reached for the last item in the box, a sealed envelope, thicker than the first one I had received, my name written again in that same careful handwriting, but this time there was something else beneath it, a second line written smaller, open this only after you have seen everything else. I stared at it for a moment, my heart beating louder now, because whatever was inside that envelope was not going to be a simple explanation. It was going to connect everything, the records, the letters, the photos, the questions my grandmother had been asking for years. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it, knowing that once I opened it, there would be no more guessing, no more piecing things together slowly, just the truth, complete and undeniable. And for the first time since this all began, I hesitated, not because I was afraid of being wrong, but because I was starting to realize just how much had already been wrong from the very beginning, and I was not sure I was ready to see how deep that went. I turned the envelope over in my hands one more time, feeling the thickness of it, the weight of something final inside. And for a moment I just stood there in that quiet room surrounded by rows of locked boxes, aware that whatever I was about to read had been waiting for years, maybe decades, specifically for this exact moment. I slid my finger under the seal slowly, more carefully than before, and opened it. Inside there were two items, a letter and a single document folded neatly beneath it. I took out the letter first, unfolding it with steady hands even though my heartbeat had already started to pick up again. Emily, if you have reached this point, then you have already seen enough to understand that something was wrong, but what you do not yet know is how far that wrongness goes. I paused for a second, my eyes scanning ahead before forcing myself to go line by line, because every word felt deliberate. I tried to fix it. The letter continued. I tried to get answers from the hospital, from the staff, from anyone who would listen, but they closed ranks quickly. Records were corrected, explanations were simplified, and every question I asked was treated like confusion instead of concern. I felt my chest tighten as I read, because I could see it happening, the quiet dismissal, the subtle redirection, the way truth can be buried under enough official language. But I did not stop. I could not. I knew I was not imagining what I saw that day. There were two babies, two families, and something happened in that hospital that should not have happened. Something they chose not to correct. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting the words settle before continuing. I did not have proof then, not the kind they would accept, but I made sure to keep everything I could because I believed that one day you would need it. And that day has come. My grip on the paper tightened slightly, because this was no longer just suspicion, this was confirmation of intent, not just a mistake, but something that had been allowed to remain at the bottom of the letter. Her tone shifted, softer but no less certain. Emily, you were never the mistake. You were the one they failed to understand, and what your father believed about you was built on a foundation he never questioned. Do not let his certainty define your truth. I lowered the letter slowly, my mind racing through everything I had just read, every memory, every comment, every moment that had felt slightly out of place, now aligning in a way that was impossible to ignore. Then I reached for the document beneath it, unfolding it carefully, and as my eyes landed on the header, my breath caught. Official birth record amendment request. Beneath it, two names, Emily Carter and Olivia Hayes, side by side, followed by a detailed account of a suspected newborn misidentification at Portland General Hospital, dated just weeks after my birth. I scanned the page quickly, my eyes moving faster than my thoughts could process. References to room changes, staff overlap, identification tag discrepancies, all the things I had seen hinted at in the previous files, but here it was laid out clearly, formally, structured in a way that made it undeniable. At the bottom of the page, there was a section labeled status, and next to it a single word, unresolved. I stared at that word for a long moment, because it meant that nothing had ever been corrected. Nothing had been confirmed, nothing had been closed. This had been left exactly as it was, buried, ignored, allowed to exist in uncertainty. I felt something shift inside me again, deeper this time, not just anger, not just confusion, but clarity, because for years I had been trying to understand why I felt out of place in my own family, why nothing quite aligned, why every attempt to belong felt like forcing pieces together that were never meant to fit. And now, standing there with the letter in one hand and the document in the other, I realized something that changed everything. This was never about whether I was my father's daughter. It was about whether I had ever been in the right family to begin with, and I did not realize then just how much that truth was about to collide with the one he had been so certain of, or how soon. The results he was waiting for would arrive and force everything into the open in a way none of us could control. For a long time I did not move. I just stood there in that quiet room holding the document, staring at the word unresolved like it might change if I looked at it long enough, but it did not. It stayed exactly the same, simple, official, final, in a way that made everything else feel unstable, because unresolved meant no answers, no correction, no closure. It meant that whatever happened in that hospital had been left exactly where it was, buried under time and silence. I slowly placed the document back into the folder, my hands more controlled now, more deliberate, like I was already shifting into something else, something steadier, because panic would not help me here, confusion would not either. What I needed was clarity, and for the first time I knew exactly where to start. I gathered everything back into the box carefully, the folders, the photos, the letter, making sure nothing was out of place. Then I closed it, locking it again with the same key, but this time it felt different, not like I was closing something away, but like I was securing evidence, something I would come back to, something I would use. When I stepped out of the room, Daniel Harper was waiting just outside, his posture unchanged, his expression calm. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes for a moment before answering. "I found more than I expected." He nodded slightly, as if that was the answer he had anticipated. "Your grandmother was very specific about ensuring you had access to everything, but also that you would decide what to do with it." I held on to that sentence, decide what to do with it, because that was the part that mattered now, not what had happened, but what I was going to do next. I thanked him, left the building, and stepped back out into the Portland air. The sky still gray, the city still moving around me like nothing had changed, but everything had, because now I was not just someone waiting for a test result. I was someone holding proof that the question itself had always been wrong. I got into a rideshare without thinking too much about where I was going, just telling the driver to take me to the nearest hotel. I needed a place to think, to organize everything, to plan. The ride was quiet, and for the first time since I arrived I was not trying to remember anything. I was trying to move forward. When I reached the hotel, I checked in, went straight to my room, and spread everything out on the small desk by the window, the letter, the documents, the photos. I looked at them again, this time not as pieces of confusion, but as evidence, something structured, something I could use, because one thing was clear now: this was not going to be solved quietly. Not after years of being ignored, not after being labeled, dismissed, reduced to something I was not. I picked up my phone, unlocking it, and for a second I just stared at the screen, knowing exactly what I was about to do, but also understanding what it meant, because this was the point where everything would shift from internal to external, from private doubt to public truth. I opened my email, searched for Precision Diagnostics, and there it was, a new message that had come in just minutes ago. My chest tightened slightly as I tapped on it, the subject line: simple, direct DNA test results available. I did not open it immediately. Instead, I set the phone down on the desk right next to the documents from the box, because now, for the first time, I understood something my grandmother had tried to tell me without saying it directly. The result in that email was not the full truth, it was just one piece, and if I opened it now without context, it would only answer the wrong question again. I leaned back in my chair, looking at everything in front of me, the past laid out in paper and ink, the present waiting on my phone, and the future depending entirely on what I chose to do next. And in that moment I made a decision that would change everything. I would not let this be controlled by timing or by someone else's narrative. I would decide when the truth came out, how it came out, and who would be there to hear it, because for the first time in my life I was not reacting, I was choosing, and what I chose next would not just prove something, it would expose everything. I did not open the email that night, and I did not open it the next morning either. Instead, I woke up early in that quiet hotel room in Portland, the kind of silence that feels heavier when you know something is waiting for you. And I sat at the desk again, the documents spread out exactly where I had left them, untouched but no less powerful. I read through everything one more time, slower this time, not searching for shock but for structure, patterns, anything that could help me understand how to present this in a way that could not be dismissed or ignored, because I already knew one thing for certain: if I brought this to my father without preparation, he would find a way to reduce it, to question it, to twist it into something smaller, something manageable. And I was not going to let that happen. I picked up my phone and finally called Noah. He answered immediately, like he had been waiting. "Emily, are you okay?" I took a breath before answering. "I am in Portland. I found something big." There was a pause, then his voice softened slightly. "What kind of something?" I looked down at the photo again, at the document with the word unresolved, at the letter in my grandmother's handwriting, the kind that carried more weight than anything I had heard from my parents in years. I think I was never supposed to be where I ended up, I said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a moment before he spoke again. Do you mean? I do not know yet, I cut in because I did not want to guess out loud, not until I had everything aligned, but I know this is bigger than what my father thinks he is proving. Noah exhaled slowly, processing. What are you going to do? I looked out the window, the city still gray, still calm, like it had been waiting for me to catch up to something it already understood. I am going to finish this properly, I said, not just for me, but for whatever happened back then. After I hung up, I finally picked up my phone again, the email still there, unread. I opened it this time slowly, deliberately, and the result appeared on the screen in clear clinical language. Probability of paternity 0%. I stared at it, letting the words settle, not shocked, not surprised, just confirmed, because that part had always been there, the doubt, the difference, the quiet disconnect I could never explain. But now, instead of feeling like an ending, it felt like the beginning of something else entirely. I closed the email and set the phone down again because the real answer was not in that result, it was in everything surrounding it. I reached for my laptop, opening a new document, and began organizing everything I had: timelines, names, dates, locations, the hospital, the second name, Olivia Hayes, the correspondence, the attempt to investigate, the lack of resolution. I was not just collecting information anymore. I was building something structured, something undeniable, something that could not be brushed aside as confusion or coincidence. Hours passed without me noticing, the sunlight shifting slightly through the window, the city outside continuing its quiet rhythm, and by the time I leaned back in my chair again, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was not going to confront my father privately. I was not going to send him a message, or call him with explanations he could interrupt or dismiss. I was going to wait. I was going to let him step into the situation he thought he controlled, and then I was going to show him everything at once, clearly, publicly, in a way that left no room for interpretation, because for years he had chosen the setting, the audience, the narrative, and now it was my turn. I checked my calendar. My wedding was in 10 days, a room full of people, family, friends, witnesses, the same kind of setting he had always used. I felt a small, steady shift inside me as the idea settled into place. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter, more controlled, clarity. Because this was not about hurting him, it was about ending something that should have never existed in the first place. I closed my laptop slowly, looking at everything one last time: the letter, the documents, the truth that had been hidden for years now sitting in front of me, ready. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something close to certainty, not about who I was, but about what I was going to do next. And I did not realize then just how much that moment, that decision, would change not just my life, but everyone connected to it. The flight back felt shorter than it should have, not because the distance had changed, but because my mind was no longer wandering. It was focused, precise, moving step by step through everything I needed to do next. By the time the plane landed in Connecticut, I had already gone over the plan so many times it felt less like a decision and more like something inevitable. I did not rush when I got off the plane. I moved at the same pace as everyone else, blending into the normal rhythm of arrivals, luggage, quiet conversations, because on the outside, nothing about me had changed. But on the inside, everything had shifted into place. Noah was waiting just beyond the gate, his expression a mix of concern and relief. When he saw me, he stepped forward, pulling me into a quick embrace. "You are back," he said softly. I nodded, holding on to him for a second longer than usual, grounding myself before stepping back. "I have everything," I told him, and this time I did not need to explain further, because something in my voice made it clear. We drove back to my apartment in near silence, not uncomfortable, just focused, like we both understood that whatever came next required space. When we got inside, I laid everything out on the table again, the same way I had in the hotel: the letter, the documents, the photos. Noah moved closer, looking carefully, his eyes scanning each piece, his expression shifting as he began to understand the scope of it. "This is not just a mistake," he said quietly. "No," I replied, "it is something they chose not to fix." We stood there for a moment, both looking at the same set of facts, the same undeniable pattern. And then he looked at me. "What do you want to do?" I took a breath, steady, certain. "I am not going to confront him before the wedding," I said. "I am going to let him walk into it exactly the way he planned." Noah frowned slightly, thinking. "And then, you are going to show everyone?" I nodded, "not out of revenge, but because that is the only way it cannot be dismissed, the only way it cannot be rewritten later." The room fell quiet again. The kind of silence that comes when a decision has already been made. Over the next few days, everything moved forward exactly as it had been scheduled: dress fittings, venue confirmations, calls with vendors. The surface of my life remained perfectly intact, which made the contrast even sharper, because beneath all of it, I was carrying something no one else knew, something that would change everything in a single moment. My father called twice during that week, both times to confirm details, timelines, logistics, his tone controlled, confident, like he was managing an event, not realizing he was stepping into something he no longer understood. My mother called once, her voice quieter than usual, hesitant, asking if I was all right. I told her I was, and in a way it was true because for the first time in my life I was not waiting for approval. I was not trying to fit into something that never quite held me. I was standing outside of it, seeing it clearly for what it was. The night before the wedding, I stood alone in the venue during the final walkthrough, the space empty except for rows of chairs and soft lighting being tested by the staff. I walked slowly down the aisle, the same path I would walk the next day, but this time without an audience, without expectation, just me and the quiet weight of what I knew was coming. I stopped near the front, looking out at the empty seats, imagining them filled, my family, his friends, everyone who had ever accepted the version of the story that had been told for years. And I felt something settle inside me, not nerves, not fear, something steadier, resolve, because this was not about creating a scene, it was about ending one, ending a narrative that had defined me for too long. I reached into my bag, touching the edge of the folder I had prepared, everything organized, every piece ready not to attack but to reveal. And as I stood there in that quiet room, I realized something that made everything feel even clearer. Tomorrow was not just a wedding. It was the moment where truth and certainty would collide in front of everyone. And for once, I would not be the one standing there trying to explain myself. I would be the one holding the answer. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly. Almost too quietly, like the world had decided to hold its breath just long enough for everything to fall into place. I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite, adjusting a small detail on my dress, not because it needed fixing, but because I needed something to focus on, something simple, something controlled. Outside, I could hear soft movement, guests arriving, chairs being arranged, the low murmur of voices building slowly into something fuller, something public. Noah knocked gently before stepping in, his expression calm but searching. "Are you ready?" he asked. I met his eyes in the mirror, and for the first time I answered without hesitation, yes, not because I knew how everything would unfold, but because I knew exactly what I was bringing into that room. We walked together toward the entrance, stopping just before the doors opened to the aisle. I could see them through the small gap, rows-filled, familiar faces, my family, his family, friends, people who had watched me grow up, people who had heard the same version of my story for years without ever questioning it. My father stood near the front, composed as always, speaking quietly with someone, his posture confident, controlled, like he was exactly where he expected to be. I felt a small shift inside me, not anger, not fear, something steadier, something final. The music began, soft at first, then rising, and the doors opened. I stepped forward slowly, each step measured, deliberate, the room turning toward me, eyes following, attention gathering, exactly the kind of setting he had always chosen, only this time it was mine. I walked down the aisle, my gaze steady, not searching for approval, not seeking reassurance, just moving forward. When I reached the front, I stopped, standing across from Noah, the officiant beginning the ceremony with practiced calm. But I did not sit into it, not yet. I turned slightly, looking at my father, his expression shifting just enough to register confusion because something in the timing was off. I reached into the small folder I had carried with me, the one no one else had noticed, and for a brief moment the room fell quieter, like something had changed. Without anyone understanding why, I spoke before anyone could redirect it, my voice clear, steady, not raised, but strong enough to carry. "There is something I need to say before we continue." A ripple moved through the room, subtle but undeniable. My father straightened slightly, his expression tightening. "Emily, this is not the time," he said, low but firm. I held his gaze. "This is exactly the time," I replied. And for a second everything paused. I opened the folder, pulling out the first document, the DNA result, holding it where he could see it. "You wanted proof," I said. "You wanted certainty." His eyes moved to the paper, scanning quickly, and I watched the moment it registered, the slight shift, the confirmation he had been waiting for. But I did not stop there. I placed that document down, pulling out the next, the hospital records, the correspondence, the photos, laying them out one by one, methodically, not rushed, not emotional, just clear. "This is the part you never asked about," I continued, "the part you never questioned because it did not fit the version of the truth you decided on." The room was silent now, completely, every eye fixed on the space between us. I held up the final document, the one with both names, the one that connected everything. "This was never just about whether I was your daughter," I said, my voice steady. "It was about whether I was ever supposed to be in this family at all." His expression changed then, not just confusion, something deeper. Something breaking through the certainty he had held onto for years. I saw my mother in the corner of my vision, her hand rising slightly to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the documents, on me, on everything she had avoided for so long. I lowered the paper slowly, letting the weight of it settle into the room. For years you called me the mistake, I said. But you were asking the wrong question, because the truth is, the mistake was never me. I paused. Just long enough for the silence to deepen, to become undeniable. The mistake was believing a story that was never complete. I stepped back slightly, not away, but enough to create space, not for retreat but for clarity, for everything to be seen as it actually was, not controlled, not filtered, just real. And in that moment, standing there in front of everyone, I realized something that changed everything in a way I had not expected. I was not there to prove my worth, I was not there to win anything, I was there to end something. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer defined by the role they had given me, I was defined by the truth I chose to reveal. And nothing they said after that could change it.